They assigned me to her as a joke. That was the first thing I realized the moment I stepped off the shuttle and saw her standing on the landing platform surrounded by armed guards dressed in silver ceremonial armor, her violet eyes locked onto mine, her expression unreadable. And the moment lasted longer than it should have. She turned without a word, and her guards fell in behind her, all except me. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I was supposed to follow. Then she spoke, without turning. Keep up. Human, that was how my job as bodyguard to the sole heir of the Norithian Empire began, and I thought she hated me at first. She barely spoke to me, and when she did it was with clipped formality or mocking sarcasm. She called me things like primitive or muscle drone or earth pet, but she kept me close, always close, and not just for show either. When the trade summit on Uraxa 7 went sour, she put her hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Stay." Behind me, as the shouting escalated and alien diplomats began. Reaching for weapons, I expected her guards to react. They didn't. She did with a flick of her hand, and a stare so cold it froze the air. The room fell silent. And later, when we were alone, she looked at me with something almost like curiosity and asked, "Why didn't you move?" When a weapon was drawn, I told her it was my job to protect her. She said, "Even at the risk of your own life." And I shrugged, because that's what I do. She didn't reply, then just stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Something changed after that. Small things like how she stopped calling me names, how she waited for me before entering a room, how she once corrected a noble who referred to me as a pet. "He is my guardian," she said firmly and in Norithian. That means something. Then came the assassination attempt to happen during a visit to the Temple of the Twin Moons. She insisted on going without full security, against protocol, she said, and when a robed priest reached for a blade hidden in ceremonial cloth, I was already moving. I don't remember the details, just a flash of steel, the heat of blood, and the weight of her body. When she collapsed against me, no, she wasn't hurt. The blood was mine. And she screamed my name, not human or bodyguard, but my actual name. And that scream sounded like heartbreak. She sat beside my medical pod for hours, maybe days. Her guards told me later, never leaving, never speaking, just staring. And when I woke up, her hand was in mine. She didn't let go, and she said, "You stupid brave." "Beautiful man," I told her. I was just doing my job. She said, "Stop doing your job and just live." And before I could ask what she meant, she kissed me, no hesitation, no royal decorum, just raw, honest need. And when she pulled back, she looked scared that I wouldn't feel the same, that I'd pull away. But I didn't. I kissed her back. And in that moment, the entire galaxy didn't matter. Her people didn't approve. Of course, an empress to be consorting with a human, a soldier, and nobody. There were protests, assassination attempts, political threats. But she didn't care. She stood before the High Council and said, "I will not marry a bloodline. I will marry a man who took a blade from me and asked for nothing in return." And when they tried to exile me, she stood in front of the Imperial Guards and said, "Then you'll exile me too," and none of them moved. Because she was more than just a princess. She was fire and fury, and they feared her, but I loved her not because of her crown or her defiance, but because when no one else saw me, she did. She saw the quiet pain, the endless duty, the loneliness, and she loved me not in spite of it, but because we escaped once to a small moon orbiting a gas giant far from the Empire. No titles, no guards, just her and me, and a quiet beach of glowing sand, where we watched twin suns dip below the horizon. She laughed there like I'd never heard before, free, wild, unburdened, and she told me about her dreams of peace, of unity, of seeing her people and mine walking side by side. And she said, "I want you with me always, not behind me, not beside me, but with me." And I told her I already was one night under the stars. She asked me, "Do you miss Earth?" I said, "Not really." She asked, "Do you miss your people?" And I looked at her and said, "My people are wherever you are." And she cried, then soft, quiet tears, like falling starlight. She whispered, "I was never meant to love anyone, but I love you more than anything I ever imagined." And I held her as her body trembled, because even empresses can be afraid, and even warriors can be gentle. When the Imperial Court finally relented, it wasn't because they accepted me. It was because they feared losing her, and her people loved her too much to risk her wrath or sorrow. And when she was crowned empress, she pulled me onto the dais and said, "He is not my guard. He is not my consort. He is my heart and soul. And anyone who disrespects him disrespects me." And in that moment, millions of Norithians fell silent and bowed. And later, when the lights dimmed and the ceremonies ended, she held my face in her hands and said, "Do you regret this?" And I said, "Never." And she smiled, and for once there was no weight behind her eyes, no burden, just joy. And now, years later, when I wake beside her, when I see her sleeping tangled in sheets, her violet hair glowing in the moonlight of another alien world, I still remember the first time she looked at me with more than indifference. I remember the fire and the silence and the kiss that changed everything. I was meant to be her. shield, but she became my reason. And if I had to take the blade again, if I had to bleed again for her, I would without question, without hesitation. Because love is not about duty or titles or species. It's about choosing someone again and again, even when the stars fall and the world ends. And every day she chooses me and I choose her.